Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today in this Humble Day event about women in biogeography. Today, we will talk about why we should all be concerned about gender balance in academia, particularly in the field of biogeography, and also the things that we can do to make our field a little bit better for everyone. We have a great speaker panel. You will meet them shortly. But we would also like to encourage you to ask questions. We will have questions and answers session at the end of the event after their talks, so please join in. Before we move to the talks, let me introduce ourselves, the organizers, Madres BDV. We are, well, you will see some of us around today, but there are more people working behind the scenes. And we are a group of Spanish postdocs, of Spanish moms who study biodiversity. And we decided to make this group, this community, a couple of years ago because we were deeply concerned about the effect that maternity has in women's careers. As you probably know, many women have to leave academia after their first child. And we just don't want that to be our case. So we think that maternity should not jeopardize somebody's career. And we also think that we can all work a little bit towards reducing the underrepresentation of women in academia. What I mean is talking about this famous scissors diagram that shows how the proportion of women decreases with career stage. This data is for the Spanish Research Council, but it's very similar everywhere. Well, maybe not as bad as it is in Spain, because as you can see, the gap is now wider at the earlier stages of the career. It's wider than it was 10 years ago. So with all these things in mind, we made this community and we have some suggestions or some wishes about how we could reduce the impact of maternity in a career. First, we think we can make things easier for moms. We can have work-family reconciliation policies in our institutions and research groups. And we can also demand hiring schemes specific for moms or for people who have had long career breaks. Similarly, we are all very concerned sometimes about the 50-50 balance in academia, but that concern mostly applies in many cases to what we call services to academia and not to the most important aspects of our career, like promotions or career development. And well, we know very well that having a child impacts everyone's career. But it's not the same in the case of moms and than in the case of dads. And that should be also taken into account. And finally, we would like to see everybody with a purple lens on, because we all have unconscious gender biases. And this is why we think it's very important to be aware of ours before we make decisions that may affect other people's lives. So these are our wishes, our suggestions. Today we will hear many more. So let's meet our panelists. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Carola, for this nice presentation of our group. I'm Elena Concepcion, also a member of Madres BDB. And I will introduce our panelists. We are delighted to come with such an outstanding panel with renowned scientists in the field of biogeography, more widely in ecology, namely Anna Traveset, Maria Dornelas, Casey Willis, and Christine Meynard. We should like to welcome and thank you all for accepting our invitation to share with us your experiences and views on this important topic, how to support more women in biogeography. And we will start with your interventions, with your speeches, and after all of them, we will continue with a first round of questions. I want to tell the audience that you can use the chat to make your questions to the speakers, and we will try to incorporate most of them in a second round. Let's start then with the first speaker, Anna Traveset. research professor at the Mediterranean Institute for Advanced Studies of the Spanish Research Council. She is also a member of the Life Area Commission and institutional representative of this research body in the Balearic Islands. Thank you, Anna. Without any further ado, I give you the floor, or rather the screen. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in this webinar. I do think that organizing this section is a great initiative, so congratulations. And I also think that this is essential to keep fighting and raising awareness on this unfair discrimination that women scientists suffer just for being women. Women are playing an increasing important role in science today, but there are still many obstacles that can prevent them from achieving success comparable to men. So we all need to remove these obstacles, right? Okay, you asked me about to give reasons of why I think it's more difficult for women than for men to be successful in science. This has been documented in different studies. I've been reading quite a bit in these last days. I will point out here just 4 of those I consider most important. First, in male-dominated cultures, as science, engineering, technology, there is still a considerable gender inequity in job requirement, promotion, and retention of female faculty and staff scientists. This phenomenon of inbreeding homophily, which refers to the increased affinity between persons with similar attributes, is damaging to female scientists whose work ends up being overlooked due to unconscious and negative bias. This inbreeding homophily needs to be taken into account for the peer review of manuscripts, for grant evaluation, when hiring or when designing mentoring programs. A second reason is that women usually reach their peak biological time for having children at the same time they are starting their careers as postdocs. Having children, of course, means investing time in childcare that cannot be dedicated to read and write papers, prepare grant proposals, attending meetings, doing networking, and participating in organizational decision-making, etc. In those disciplines requiring much fieldwork, like ecology or biogeography, sometimes having to be away from home for days or even for weeks, it becomes quite difficult, especially when the kids are still very young, to combine fieldwork with family duties. A report from the Global Health Institute in Barcelona that I've been reading recently, has recently shown that in general, the time that women spend in domestic activities and care triples that of men. And this confinement that we had during the current pandemic has exacerbated this difference. So before the pandemic, women spent an average of 13 hours, which is a lot, more than men per week in such unpaid work. Third reason is that women in science can face intimidation and harassment, as you know, and this may cause that they abandon their career. This is, of course, totally intolerable and should be immediately reported when it happens. It surely happens in some countries more than in others, but I'm afraid it's a general problem that must be eradicated. And a fourth reason is like the lack of self-belief that can also affect men, but it's more accentuated in women. And this lack of self-belief acts as a barrier to women's career advancement. So to have successful career in male-dominated work environments, such as the science and technology and engineer, the need for women to have academic and relational self-efficacy beliefs is greater than in other disciplines. These self-efficacy beliefs enable women to overcome hardships and be persistent under adverse conditions and provide them with the perseverance and resilience needed to overcome the career obstacles. So the fear of failing to achieve promotion for reader to reader or professor may in part explain why fewer women apply for senior positions in this SET, and thus creates a barrier to career advancement. Well, you asked me also to provide some measures to avoid that motherhood penalizes career development. And well, here are some of them. I think there is nothing new, nothing novel, but I think it's good, well, just to list some of them, and I'm sure the other panelists will also give others. Not in order, not important, okay? So one is, I think, is that allowing both parents to have the same period of parental leave should be a good way to mitigate the women's disadvantage of having to reduce scientific activities relative to men. At least in Spain, paternity leave currently lasts 12 weeks for being compulsory. And from 2021 on, it will be 16 weeks, 6 being compulsory, thus equating the leaves for both parents. When I had my children nearly 20 years ago, fathers could take only 3 days off. So we have advanced marginally this sense. However, there are still strong differences among countries, even if in Europe. So for instance, in Italy, they allow them only 7 days, or in Greece, only 2 days. Right? So there's much variation among countries. Another measure is, I think, that during the first years of childcare, women should have more flexible schedules. They should be allowed to work from home for longer periods. We all now know that it's not necessary to go to the office or to the lab every day for some tasks, like analyzing data, reading and writing papers, etc. And this saves time and may make women's life easier during the childcare period, I think. Another measure, I think that, well, being a mother should not preclude attending conferences and presenting results in them and doing networking. So I think that the organizers from now on of all symposia or conferences should make sure that they allocate resources to include nursery space in the building where the meetings take place, and to hire people to look after the children during these meetings. Fourth measure, funding organizations should be quite flexible for mothers when they request project extensions, for instance. Also through research grant programs, such as career development awards for researchers at different stages of their careers, we could help diversify research and support scientists. We must believe that, yeah, if we invest in women in science, we will assure diversity in research, which in turn is critical for innovation. When the teams are diverse, they arrive at much more sustainable solutions. Many companies know that. A better understanding of the problems, they provide more creative ideas, more knowledge, more ethical and effective responses, so the entire community wins. And well, I think the scientific organization should consistently advocate for gender equality in science and seek to support this with additional resources. I don't know if I have time now to give you some data from my institution, or you want me to say this later. It's up to you.
You have time, Anna.
I have time? Okay, so regarding that, the actions that my institution has taken to promote gender equality, my institution is the Spanish Research Council, and this institution has traditionally maintained a specific commitment for policies for equal opportunities for men and women in their working conditions, complying with the equality legislation, integrating the spirit of such legislation in its operational culture, and aligning its actions with the objectives of the European research area, thus guaranteeing the effective promotion of gender equality and the integration of the gender perspective in the context of research and innovation. In 2002, the CSIC founded the Commission of Women and Science, whose primary mission is to advise the CSIC presidency on gender considerations to conduct studies and to monitor actions for the optimization of the women's scientific career in the agency. Thereafter, in 2011, the CSIC Executive Committee on Equality was launched, and this commission is responsible for the effective implementation of actions leading to the effective equality of CSIC employees. And just 2 years ago, 2018, the CSIC presidency instituted the Gender Equality Accreditation Seal, with the objective of recognizing the CSIC centers or institutes that promote both the gender perspective as a transversal category in all aspects of its day-to-day running, and the adoption of measures to remove the barriers found by women while exercising their profession. It's also worth highlighting the outreach campaign, Women Are CSIC, and the commemorative events that are regularly held to mark the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, 11th February, and International Women's Day, the 8th of March. Also in the Spanish Agency of Research, I know that by having been in some of the evaluation panels, that they are very aware of the unconscious gender bias, and some of the measures they have taken is always showing a video on this problem at the very beginning of the evaluation process, and discussing about it during the entire process. And I know also, at least for some of the panel chairs, that they asked to talk about, when they talk about the project's PI, they only refer to the last name, always avoiding to remind evaluators the gender of the PI. Right? This is a small thing that can be important. I have some data to show you or to tell you from the Spanish Research Council. We are 36% of women in scientific staff, but the research professors only 26.6, which is very far from the 50%, right? The average glass ceiling index for the CSIC is 1.35, but quite worrying in the area of natural resources, this figure is 2.28. This is the highest of all areas and has increased relative to previous years. Also in the last 6 years, there has been a decrease of 14% in the contracts of women. And in the CSIC, 35% of the national projects are led by women. But it's important to note that the collection of resources in these calls is comparable between male and female researchers. Regarding European projects, only 28% of them, 28%, are led by women. From the point of view of technology transfer, the participation of women as inventors of priority patents in 2019 was around 39%. And I think I am over time, right? So I think I better stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. You have presented quite revealing figures about the current situation of women in science, especially in Spain and in the life area. We will go further in details on this afterwards in the round of questions. And now let's move on to our next speaker, Maria Dornelas, reader in the School of Biology at the University of St Andrews, UK. Maria is also a member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh Young Academy of Science and Deputy Editor-in-Chief for Global Ecology and Biogeography. Thank you so much, Maria. You can start when you want.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can now see my screen. As mentioned, I'm many things. I'm also a mother of 2 boys, so I'm very much relate to the hurdles that there are in terms of doing science while parenting. I think I'm here largely in my role as Deputy Editor-in-Chief for Global Ecology and Biogeography, and that's the perspective that I'm going to talk to in my short talk. So GEB, that's what we call it because it's a very long title. It has an editor-in-chief team. So the editor-in-chief is Brian McGill, but Richard Field and myself work with Brian on a rota system, which means that I am directly involved in screening 2/3 of the papers that come into GEB, at any one time. So we work on a rota system, which means that we take every third week off. And that means that there's 2 of us who screen every paper that comes into the journal. And the reason why I'm telling you this detail about how the journal is run is that we do it this way because we felt that having multiple people discussing each paper reduces the level of reduces the space for unconscious bias to creep into our decisions. There are things that we can control as journal editors and things that we can't. We can't control who submits papers to us, for example. So if you ask me to give you data on the gender of paper submissions, so first of all, it's not actually data we always collect, and second of all, it's not actually something that we can control, but there are things that we can control, and those we have been working towards making the journal more inclusive and promoting diversity amongst the people who are involved in the journal. So one of the things that we have done since joining the editor-in-chief team was to change the board gradually change the board of associate editors. I'll try to find data as far back as I could. The earliest data that I could find was for 2006. And at that point in time, the journal had 2 female associate editors and 16 male associate editors. So that was a ratio of 1:8. Right now, we have vastly grown the number of associate editors in the journal, and the ratio is 1 to 1.5 roughly. And we've done this gradually and over time. There's also been turnover in terms, because being an associate editor is a bit of a thankless task in that people have to work quite hard for, I would say, not a lot of credit. It's one of these altruistic things that we do because we love our field and we love science, and we want to do a good job and make sure that it works. All the steps that are involved in publishing. And so, so I hope you would agree that even though we haven't achieved gender parity yet in terms of the associate editors, we're definitely going in that direction, and the bias is much reduced. However, I want to make the point that diversity is not just about gender. Right? There are all kinds of different things that are involved in diversity, from ethnic origin to disabilities. And as much as I very much relate to the topic of motherhood, I want to make the point that there's all kinds of different families, and not all of them, in not all families, the burden as well as the pleasure of child rearing falls on the female only. And so I like to think of gender imbalances as a symptom of biases in the system, rather than the thing itself, the problem itself. So we care about the fact that there are very, very biased gender ratios, because that tells us that there are likely to be barriers in place, and I think we should work towards removing barriers more generally, not just fixing gender ratios per se. And so we've been, again, we think about this very carefully, and we have identified other barriers that we think are also at work. So for example, geography, where you're from, and the scientific culture, and the fact that we're publishing in English in an Anglo-Saxon scientific culture. People's career stage can work as a barrier as well, and there are language barriers. There's all kinds of different barriers, and we have introduced multiple initiatives in the journal to try and remove these barriers in the publication process. One of the things that we introduced was a double-blind peer review process, and the reason there is not that there's actually a lot of evidence that the peer review process is biased, at least not against females, but it's just difficult to defend why the identity of the authors should be relevant information in terms of identifying whether or not a paper is worthy of publication. It should be about the content of the science, not the identity of the people who did it. So we've turned the journal to double blind a few years ago, and it seems to be working pretty well. We also try to increase the geographic representation within your journal. That's a very strong bias that we have, and I would argue that most journals have as well. And if we care about biogeography, then we should care about the biogeography of our authors as well. And mostly the most important way in which we try to do this is by constructing an environment that is very much focused on constructive criticism and balanced by scientific rigor, where there is no room for ad hominem attacks anywhere from the reviewer comments to evidently editor comments. We try to catch ourselves and be self-critical to the entire process, and mostly just creating an inclusive culture that works for everyone, including people who are different from ourselves, and making sure that deadlines are flexible when they need to be flexible, and in general just trying to create a welcoming environment, while not compromising the scientific scrutiny that needs to take place during the peer review process. Okay, and that is all I had to say for now.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Really interesting the issues you have raised about the presence of women in editorial boards and other inequalities that for sure deserve to be addressed as well. Well, now is the turn of Kathy Willis, Professor of Biodiversity in the Department of Zoology and Principal of St. Edmund Hall at the University of Oxford. She's also Adjunct Professor in Biology at the University of Bergen, Norway, and President of the International Biogeography Society. Thank you, Kathy. You can proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, and very good to see everyone here today. So I have put together some slides as well. I'll just share my screen if possible. So I took the topic that I was asked to talk about, which was effectively the sort of evolution of one's career, and how and where gender bias, if there is it in there, comes in. And I just wanted to talk about my own experience, the issues faced, and the things that I try and do in order to try and move on and try and change this gender bias. But I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'll talk mainly about myself, and then come towards the Biogeography Society and also the organisations I've worked in towards the end. So I thought I'd start with the child photo. This is me when I think I must be about 2. I grew up in a very gender balanced family. I had a sister and a brother, and I started, my first day at school was in 1969, a long, long time ago. Right, so if we just look on this screen here, then I'll show, that is me there. But if you could see when it's actually within the full screen, what you'd see is that in fact, okay, so I went to an all-girls school. And so therefore there was no, I didn't really even think about gender bias in any way. It was a school where everybody, this is my class, because I was the age of 16, everybody did all the sciences. We did 3 sciences at GCSE or O level. And there was as many people doing physics A level and geography and biology A levels as there were doing the humanities subjects. My first sort of experience really, or understanding of a very gender unbalanced system, is when I went to university. I first went to University of Southampton, and I read environmental science and geography there. And this is me with the green here. And you'll see that row there is all women in my year. This row there is all men. And the front row are the lecturers. And so what you see in here is that those are my lecturers, blue, all men. And what I realized when I went back to this photo, there was one woman that taught me. So suddenly, having gone from an all-girls school with all female teachers teaching all science and everything else, I suddenly went to a university department where effectively it was all men that were in the senior positions apart from one woman. So I then went to Cambridge to do a PhD, and I thought it might be a bit better there. And I did a PhD in the sub-department of quaternary research. But then when I actually mapped out, because I think in a sense I wasn't even aware of it, and I mapped out the differences, all the professors and lecturers were male, and it was only the technical staff that were female. There were 3 technicians and a male. But then if you look at the postdocs, same old thing. The postdocs were mainly female, and yet we had no one to look up to really in terms of that gender bias in there, or balance in there. And finally, I went to Oxford, where I still am now, and I was lucky, I think, because I actually started off with a lectureship in the School of Geography and Environment. And if you look at it now, this is a good balance, I would say. 23 men and 27 men are on the staff. And then I moved to the Department of Zoology, and I am there now, which has got not so good, 23 women and 35 men. But the department I spend most of my time in is in plant sciences, which has 4 women and 19 men in their staff. So this is in 2020. This is not in 1985. This is the present day reality of what we're looking at when you look at these higher positions in and across a university. I mean, this is the point to make. It can be a one department, whereas another department can have made a lot more effort to, I would argue, to bring more women in. Now, I was lucky because I had 3 children, and they were all born when I was in the Department of Geography. And I think in that department, and it still is the case now, I would argue that both the men and women in that department are supportive of people who have children. And I can think of male colleagues and I think of female colleagues that were very supportive while I was on maternity leave and or juggling childcare issues. But also the university had a nursery, and all my children went to university nursery. It's very, very different if you don't have that facility. And I've seen colleagues struggle because they're trying to balance childcare issues at home and then come in to do a day's work. Whereas with the university facility, you can then drop them off on the way in, pick them up on the way home. So then I moved to the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew as the Director of Science there for 5 years. I was on secondment from the university. And when I arrived there, the first thing I did, or one of the first things I did, was a gender balance survey, because by then I was much more aware of this sort of gender question. And so they at that point, they didn't have PhD students, didn't really have postdocs, so they had these different bands. So band A is those that are technicians, and then the more academically qualified you become, the further up you go this banding. And I think this is a very typical of most institutions in the UK. When you start to look here, all these lower bands are filled by the women, and as you move into the higher scientific bands, they're filled by the men. And what I found at Kew, actually, many of the women in these bands had just never moved. They got into that band, and there were no promotion opportunities for them, that they were effectively stuck in that lower band, and they're not going to change jobs. I mean, it's a fantastic place to work. Therefore, you're trapped in that band. And so your new hires might be able to move up, but women in here are effectively permanently in that band. So what can we do about it? We all know that there are these issues, and we can see these graphs. I thought the graph you showed, Carol, at the beginning, of the changes in the number of men and women and how you get that drop. The sad thing is we carry on repeating this mistake time and time and time again. And, you know, when I looked at those statistics from the 3 departments in Oxford that I work most closely with, I was quite depressed, actually, because to me that suggests that we really are not learning. And I want to go through some personal thoughts and things that I do and things that I think we all need to be thinking about on a daily basis. Well, the first one, and I think this point's been made in the previous two talks very, very well, is awareness is the first step in addressing unconscious gender bias. And the real issue I came across in Kew, I remember quite clearly, where we were interviewing some candidates coming in, and there was a mixed panel. And when the men came in to be interviewed, we were asking a different set of questions in a different way to the way we were asking the questions when the women came in. And because I'd done unconscious gender bias training, after one of the women left, I said, hang on, stop everyone. We're not asking the same questions in the same way of the men as we are of the women. And there was one man in the room who got really cross. He said, I'm not sexist. And the point being that he thought that unconscious gender bias was basically saying, you are being sexist by asking the question in a different way. And it absolutely wasn't. And I think that's one of the things that's one of the problems with the word gender bias, is that immediately people think that you're using it, it's an insult, rather than actually it's something that we all have in us. And I certainly learned that when I did the unconscious gender bias training. I realized that the way I was writing my references for my male postdocs were very different to the way I was writing my references for my female postdocs. So when the females were applying for jobs, I'd always say they're a good team player, they're very good in the lab, blah, 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 blah. I didn't very often say that about my male postdocs, because I was bringing in my own unconscious gender bias in there, even as a woman. I mean, I was doing it anyway. So I think I can't emphasize enough how important I think that one is. I think the second one is the scientific community really, really needs to rethink metrics used to judge someone's career trajectory. We still use H-index, we still use the number of citations of different papers, X, Y, Z, and people are still held up as being particularly good because they've got a high H-index. If you are managing 3 small children, writing publications is not going to be high on your list. That doesn't make you any less a good scientist, but we still do it. And I've just been reviewing some stuff only in the last couple of days, and sure enough, even though they'll say, please note maternity leave over these 2 periods, it immediately makes that CV look weaker. Whatever you do, it's in there. So we need to think of different ways right from the very start about how you assess someone's career trajectory, not just using these metrics and saying, we will take into account the fact you've had a period off having children. I think another point that I've often come across, and I do on a daily basis, I practice this, is that we should never accept gender bias comments, even in jest. Particularly on, someone will say, oh, whinging like a woman. I've heard that many times. And it's not funny. And it's demeaning of women. And you can say whinging like a man, we mustn't do it, because all it does is it makes this a light-hearted subject, which it isn't. It's a very, very serious subject, and one that we absolutely need to get on top of. And I think we always need to be aware of gender balance, and when you can influence it, do something about it. So I was with a couple of examples just to wrap up what I'm talking about. So when I was at Kew, one of the things I did was I ran an annual symposium for 3 years, which was associated with a state of the world's plants or state of the world's fungi. And in there, we'd have a 2-day symposium where you had 4 invited speakers and a chair, and each of them would be addressing a different question. And I asked my team of senior scientists, right, tell me who you'd most like to talk at this symposium. And I said, we're going to have an away day to sit down, go through those names, and come up with a list of speakers to invite. And we sat down to go through this list, and I found that 80% of the speakers were male. And I said, well, where are the women? Oh, well, it's the topic. There aren't many women in this that work in this subject, because in a sense that people are looking at H-index, they're searching who's published the most. But we went away. I said, no, we're going to have it balanced. We're going to have 50-50. We have to go away and look. And they did, and came back, said, oh yes, when we started looking, we found this person and this person and this person. So this is what we ended up with. And it's not saying every session had half men and half women. If you look down this session here, it was all red. And this session here was predominantly blue. But it meant that the overall shape of the 2 days, we had 15 women and 3 chairpersons and 16 men and 5 chairpersons. And so it was basically balanced. And this one in particular was a funny one, really, because I thought, please don't anyone at the end say, isn't it good we've got 5 women speaking here? Because one of the women in here in particular was the president of Mauritius, who is also a very, very good chemical biologist, plant scientist, who works on medicinal drugs. So we had this session, because if there'd been 5 men talking, I doubt anyone would have put their hand up and said, oh, isn't this terrible, it's 5 men, or isn't it great, it's 5 men. But sure enough, one person put their hand up and said, can I just say, isn't it good that we've got 5 women on the stage? And in a sense, you know, I see where they're coming from, but that just then makes it even more of an issue, rather than just seeing that as the norm. Some sessions are all men, some are all women, but overall, the overall shape was balanced. So what about Humboldt events then? I have to say, Miguel has been fantastic. And when I looked at the balance, it's approximately 12 are led by women and 12 are led by men. I say approximately because some are led by 2 people. So it's not as clear to get through there. But we certainly do have a balanced set of events where people from all over the world, both men and women, are leading this whole outfit, this whole week. And then if we look at the board for the International Biogeography Society, we've got 6 women and 5 men. So again, a really good balance. And that's because the International Biogeography Society board, way before my time on that board, have made an active and a positive commitment to make sure that this is balanced. And as a result of that, whenever we think about things like, you know, seminars, inviting people to talk, etc., we've always got this balance on this in this platform. So we're far from perfect, but we're definitely going, I think, in the right direction. So a few just final thoughts. I think the more senior you come, the more gender balance issues should become something you should strive to change. I work at that on a daily basis, and everybody should do that and lead by example. I'm afraid some of the worst misogynists I've met over the years have been women who've got to the top and think, well, I'm here, and actually everybody else, you know, isn't it great? I'm a lone woman up here. All of us should be every day thinking about how we change this balance. Diversity of a workforce always leads to better outcomes. There's some idea that somehow if you change the diversity, this isn't going to work. Every single example in business where they've made a more diverse workforce and brought more women onto the board or changed the balance so it's much closer has had huge positive impacts on the organization. But I think the last thing is that changing gender bias in it can take a long time, and you know, of course we all want it to happen tomorrow, and I think it's actually realizing that sometimes it will take time. And if I go back to Kew, I arrived in 2014, and I did have to, unfortunately I had to restructure due to cuts in the budgets, but when I did that, we re-interviewed and we worked very hard to change that gender bias. And as you can see, still a lot of women in these B's and C's, but as you'll see, it's these middle bands, you start to get a higher number of women coming in here. But there's still a long way to go. And I now have come back to Oxford, so I don't know where it's going. I'm sure they're on that right trajectory. Anyway, I think that's about it from me. So I'll stop sharing my screen somehow. Stop here. There you go. So sorry about the technological flaws at the beginning, but I hope that gives you some idea of the sorts of things that I've been thinking about.
Okay, thank you so much, Katie, for sharing your insights and your own experiences in academia. Now is the turn of our last speaker, Christine Meynard, researcher at the French National Institute for Agriculture and Environment, subject editor for Ecography, and deputy editor-in-chief for the Journal of Biogeography. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm missing a slide. Oh well. So I'm very happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm going to talk more from my personal perspective, but I think I was also invited to talk a little bit about, or as a deputy editor-in-chief of the journal Biogeography and also a subject editor in Ecography. So I'll say something about that too. So first of all, I wanted to start by the obvious, which has been told in the previous presentations. I think I'm going to repeat some of what has already been said, but maybe helps synthesizing. So obviously, any gender issues or any inequality issues, for that matter, they don't happen in isolation. We go to work, we have our immediate work environment, maybe we share our space with other grad student colleagues, our boss, our mentors, etc. And that immediate environment that I put here, it could be really positive or really negative in supporting or not female researchers. But then you also have a broader environment, which could be the institute you are working in or the program you're studying in, etc. And then you also have a social environment, and all these things are interacting, and obviously whatever happens in one of these little boxes will percolate and will affect the way you see the rest of your life, and including your career perspectives and your career success. And of course, all of this is within a national and an international context, and all these things can be having different dynamics at the same time. In our profession, I think we have one little aspect that is really particular to science and that cannot be found in others, and that is the fact that we collaborate a lot with a network of people who are many times outside of our immediate environment and who do have an influence in our career. And so for that little part that I put here as external drivers, you know, we should be aware of the fact that we can control a little part of that network, and that we can go actively look for the people who can be really supportive, the people who can really give us good advice, and you know, sort of be the positive change that we need in our career. So I just wanted to call attention into that. That being said, I put, you know, the journal publication outlets in this little bubble here. Obviously, if we want more women in science, on top of trying to do things at the journal level, we also need to push for change in any of the other compartments here. We need to be aware of the fact that some of us within the journals are trying to actively do something about gender balance or inequalities, but as long as all these other little boxes are moving in the long or in the good direction, we need a change that requires a lot more than just a little piece of change in one institution or in one journal. So in the Journal of Biogeography, I've been deputy editor for less than 2 years. I was a subject editor for a couple of years before. As I think Maria said, it is not obvious to find statistics regarding gender or other inequality issues because the author information is not always available. In the case of Journal Biogeography, the journal started asking for full names only in 2006. And even if you have the full name of a person, that doesn't mean that you know whether it's a female or a male. And so these statistics were digged, have been worked by someone at Wiley who helped us dig this information from 2006. And so among submissions, we have about 27% of our papers that are submitted with females as first author. The percentage is fairly similar for the published papers. So around 28% of papers that are published with a female as a first author. And the numbers are similar, except maybe that for corresponding authors, the percent goes down a little bit to 24%. And also for reviewers, we have around 22% of our reviewers who are female. The editor-in-chief is Mike Dawson, so he's a male. We have we're five deputy editors-in-chief, 2 females and 3 males. Among our associate editors, 26% are female. This is something that we've been trying to change for a while, trying to incorporate more women in the editorial team, but it's not always easy. And in fact, if we look just at this year, we incorporated 5 new editors, 3 of which are female, but we also invited 7 others, mostly females, who declined. We also have social media editors, 1 female, 2 males. We have a number of recent initiatives to try to actively get more women and early career researchers to get their career highlighted, etc. And so we have a blog where we've been highlighting early career researchers, and for which it's pretty much half and half female and male. We have a recent editorial academy that we started this year, where we have 3 females and 3 males. And then we very recently, in early July, we published an equality, diversity, and inclusion statement that all the authors should read and agree on upon submission. So we have these 3 new initiatives. We have a blog talking about those. The editorial academy is already closed. We have a small grants for global colloquial that is still open. And soon in October, we will open GBI Awards for Innovation. And all these 3 initiatives were meant not only to encourage early career scientists, but also advancing in equality, diversity, and inclusion. And then we are also preparing other sorts of initiatives, one of which is coming really soon, which will be a new virtual issue highlighting papers from female biogeographers in our journal. In Ecography, the editorial board is currently 28% female. When I accepted the subject editor position there, Miguel Araujo was just starting as the chief editor, and he was very active in trying to push for a higher percent of females in the editorial board. And at some point, it got to be 35%. But it's not secret that the COVID crisis has affected more females than males. And so recently there has been a number of resignations, mostly from female editors. Ecography also recently added an EDI statement in the author's guidelines. And they also adopted a double-blind review. Now, it's interesting that in Journal Biogeography and in Ecography, we had a debate about whether or not the double-blind review process would be good or bad. And we came to the opposite conclusion. So GBI did not implement it, and Ecography did implement it. So as I was preparing this, I was trying to think of suggestions on what we can do at the personal level, and also trying to avoid the obvious recommendations that they were already said. I think that when you come to a point where you start having some power over, having students and people working for you, and etc., you also have to understand that life is not only science, and act accordingly. I think it's very important that when a student comes to you and they come with some problem, family problem, do not be dismissive and try to think about ways to help that person. At the personal level too, I think choosing a supportive partner or being that supportive partner is essential, especially when you are in an early stage in your career where one of you will have to sacrifice some aspect of your career so that the other can do better, and taking roles and not always being the same who renounces to some advantage. Yeah, in particular in our profession, we're often required to move across countries or continents in order to have the best postdoc or the best collaborations, etc. So you have to find a way to balance in your own personal life the decisions that you feel are a good balance for yourself. And then as Kathy said, I think understanding your own biases is important because it's impossible to be completely neutral. I'm sure everyone has some biases, but trying to understand those and figure out which ones are the most important and how you can change that is also part of the process. At the institutional level, I think having clear, explicit best practice guidelines is fundamental. And this may seem as obvious maybe in the European or the North American context. I come from originally from South America, so I've lived through different combinations of good and bad work and social environments, going from Chile to the US, then to France, then back to the US, and then back to France. And I don't think the causes of the inequalities are the same in all these places. But one thing that can clearly help is to have those explicit and clear guidelines at all levels in the academic environment. Obviously, provide a scale of salaries that is standard, clear, and as objective as possible. Also, as a researcher, avoid shortcuts. Sometimes it is tempting to have, part-time positions. This is something that I've seen often, where instead of offering 100% postdoc, I'm going to offer 50%. And the problem with that is that for some reason, it's often women who end up accepting that sort of position. And that creates another inequality right there. Obviously provide stability and security. I mentioned access to psychological health care. I don't think maternity stops at maternity leave. It's only 4-6 months period, but there are a lot of things that change with the first child, and many times women and guys need some sort of external support to understand and manage that change, especially for the first kid. There's also the possibility that the child has some sort of disability or behavioral issues, etc. So, this sort of higher workload from the parental perspective can take not only 4-6 months, but years and the whole life, actually. And then as also Kathy was saying, I think including selection criteria that are based on quality of science and not only in that quantity of papers and impact factors and all that is also important. And of course, provide work flexibility in childcare facilities. So these were just some personal thoughts. It's not something that I researched a lot, but that I have seen throughout my career. So I put it out there, and that's about what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Christine, for sharing your thoughts. You have presented very relevant data on the current situation of women in editorial boards that we can discuss later on. And no, I'm not sure. Should we move on to the first round of questions to the panelists that will be opened by Rosa Tefawi, another of the members of Madres BDB?
Hi, everybody. I'm Rosa Tefawi, also a member of Madres BDB. I want to thank all the speakers these really interesting talks because you have covered a lot of topics such as potential causes of gender bias and measures already being taken. My question is for Katie. Katie, you have provided us with a precious view of your personal experience and the evolution of gender bias across time. And you have also provided very interesting active measures to avoid it. Let's focus now in the special issue. As Carola and Anna showed us in their talks, there seems to be a gender gap in science in Spain, particularly in the field of natural resources. Also, you showed us that it is quite similar in the UK. As the president of the IBS, do you perceive this gender imbalance as a global issue, similar in all countries?
Yes, I do. And it's funny, I was going to be, a couple of years ago, I thought wrongly, actually, that it was something where the Scandinavian countries were much better at gender in terms of they have much better maternity cover, much better support networks. And I went to a really good workshop run by a group of postdocs at University of Oslo, and I hope they don't mind talking about it, but it was exactly the same. The processes they were describing, so even though they had got these really generous childcare setups and where the men and women could take equal maternity leave, etc., they still had the same issues apparent in the system. So I think there's not one country where it's, I mean, there are obviously some countries where it's worse than others, but I think that the problem is right the way across academia, particularly in the sciences and in geography. I think when you move to the humanities, it's less so. Or that's my understanding of it, but that's I'm not a humanities person, so I don't know. But I do think it's so that we need to be addressing it as an issue across every single department in the world, rather than just going for one or two areas.
Thank you, Katie. So it is a widespread problem.
Yes.
Thank you. Elena? Elena?
I think no, it was, yeah? Sorry. Well, my question is for Christine. To what extent do you consider is maternity which underlies the gender gap in science?
I think that more than maternity is the culture that surrounds maternity. You know, as many before me mentioned, even though, you know, you might have places where you have the same amount of maternity or paternity leave after birth, men can usually still take less time. When I had my daughter in France, it was still the case where my husband could only take 7 days, and I took the 4 or 5 months that I wanted. When I had my boy in the US, I had to take sick leave. So because maternity leave doesn't really exist. And so that's even worse. But and so that starts the life of the child already with the presence of the mother being more important just because you're there and the guy is somewhere else. And then it keeps going. If you at some point I went with my daughter to a psychologist because we were having a lot of issues, and one of the first things that this person told me was 90 or 95% of the people I see are the mothers. The guys, it's not that they don't care, it's just that they have more trouble admitting that their children have an issue that they cannot solve, or that they have more trouble looking for help. And so it's percolating from every angle. And that's why I say, you know, we of course it is important to try to change whatever little things we can in our work environment, but the change, the big change, needs to happen from a broader cultural change.
So, okay, thank you. Well, just very briefly, motherhood. It doesn't imply a permanent reduction of productivity. It is temporal. The problem is that this slowdown concurs with a stage of our research careers when we are expected to be more productive in order to consolidate our careers. How can this temporal slowdown be better addressed to avoid mothers' withdrawal from academia? For instance, evaluating curricula or just with some additional time to consolidate positions? I don't know.
And that question was also for me?
Yes, but okay. Of course, if anyone else has any suggestion on this, please feel free to share with us.
I think that the slides that Kathy showed are really good. Again, you know, I think having explicit guidelines is helpful, but a lot of the people I talk, especially again, you know, the context can be very different. In Chile, I think there is still a lot of very openly sexist stuff going on, versus in Europe, I think everyone says like, no, not sexist, no. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you deal with those two situations differently. And a lot of French people I've talked to basically deny the problem. You know, it's if you think if there is less women in the department, it's because they chose to, or they have a problem with their partner, or, you know, and I would call that like the male privilege in analogy to the white privilege. You know, someone who has not experienced this type of discrimination does not relate to it, and they are better off just closing their eyes and saying the problem doesn't exist. So again, I think that having the clear guidelines is definitely important, but to me, it's key that we also have active support, actively going out to support the female young researchers, and to balance the committees, and actively go out there and being very attentive to any sort of bias that you see, and try to catch it and put it out there.
Okay, I think Maria want to add something.
Could I add a little bit to that? So I wanted to make the point that I think one of the things that can help is normalize the fact that actually it's not just maternity, it's parenthood, right? So there's often a whole family involved in looking after children and helping them grow, and normalizing the fact that it is okay for people to take time off in their careers, and recognize that in our evaluations, some of the things that in our department we have put in place that help with that include having well-being rooms that people can use to look after their children when they're very young, if they want to come in, having keep in touch days so that when they are away. So one of the things that I struggle with after maternity leave was you spend this, well, I spend this time in this fog of baby time, and you know, feeding babies and nappies and stuff, and the transition between that and science was, at least for me, a gradual one, and so having this sort of keeping touch days, normalizing things like taking children everywhere. You know, my kids came with me to the fields, to conferences, to all kinds of places, normalizing people having a life beyond their careers, male or female or any gender they identify with, is I think the way forward. So making it a problem that affects everyone. I mean, we were all the child, right? So this is not just a women's problem. It's a problem with families and work life. And if we make it everyone's problem, then I think we're like it's a step forward.
Hi, Maria. I have also a question for you. You have already described how your journal is already adopting measures to increase diversity in biogeography and reducing gender bias, specifically increasing the number of women associated editors. I think this is really important. In the line of Christine's talk, this year, a study found a pervasive gender bias in the editorial boards of biodiversity conservation journals. The editorial boards of 31 journals were composed of 1,250 editors, of which only 29% were women, and even worse, only 19% of editors-in-chief were women. As Christine commented previously, the lower number of women in editorial boards is sometimes explained by women being reluctant to step up or accept this type of positions. What is your experience in global ecology and biogeography?
Oh, I think it very much mirrors what Christine mentioned and Kathy mentioned as well, is that first of all, there is a bias in the process of thinking about who to invite to the system. So if we just use the first names that come to our heads, we end up with very biased lists because I forget the name, there's an expression in psychology for this. So we're biased towards people who are more like us. And so, we're biased by the people we are familiar with. And
breeding homophily, that's what I said.
Yes, and that's the expression I was looking for. Thank you, Anna. So there's that issue. So that there's a first hurdle there in that we come up with biased lists. The second issue, and I think it was Christine who mentioned this. So we have improved our gender bias, but we've had to invite many more women than the ones who have accepted. And I think that's partly because there are fewer women in more advanced stages, and so we get asked to do a lot more things, and so we are rightly so reluctant to do a lot of service work, because let's be blunt about this. Every time I spent reviewing or editing other people's work, I'm not working on my own papers, right? Yeah. And if my CV is going to be judged by my publication list, it's actually not super smart to be doing a lot of the service work if we were super selfish, which I don't think we should be. So I think it's creating a culture where we value this altruistic behavior, and don't expect just women do it. If there's fewer women around in the positions that get invited to do this, if it's in some ways actually unfair to be asking women to do too much. So it is getting the balance right there.
And in your opinion, should journals adopt active measures to promote women inclusion in editorial boards? All the journals, not just Journal of Biogeography and your journal.
So should we have less biased editorial boards? Absolutely, not just in gender, but also trying to be more representative in general. Even though, as I think it was Kathy, you mentioned this, women, or maybe it was Christine, I don't know, women are not necessarily any less biased than men, and they're not necessarily less misogynistic than men, right? So we are all biased, and so let's not kid ourselves. If we have an all-female panel, it does not mean it's going to be fairer to women than if you had an all-male panel. What we want is a fair panel that it does not discriminate against gender or any other thing, right? So it could be ethnicity, it could be country of origin, it could be all kinds of things. So what we want is to end up with fairer panels. Part of how we can achieve that is by looking at the symptoms in our panels and say, oh, hang on, there is a bias there. Maybe we should think more broadly about who we invite to be part of this. But we also have other biases, right? I think it was Christine who mentioned being from Chile, and you know, we have strong geographic biases in our panels as well. And one thing we have noticed is that when we invite associate editors from a particular country, so, paper submissions from that country increase. So we can actually improve the representation of the papers in our journal by looking at geographic diversity as well as gender diversity. And I think we should aim towards sort of fairer panels.
You mean there is some type of feedback?
Yes, but it's a complicated one, right? So you want to choose people who are going to thrive to be balanced, not just choose them based on their gender, I think. So some of the suggestions, you know, let's only hire women for, I'm really not okay with that, because I think that, you know, because we wouldn't be okay with the opposite either, right? We wouldn't be okay with let's just hire men. So I do think that is the
balance, to find a balance.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria.
Well, I am sorry to cut this discussion because it was very interesting, and we would need like 1 more hour to really go through all the different questions that we all have in our minds, and the people were asking really nice questions. So our plan is to copy all this and continue the discussion now in Twitter. So if Anna or Maria or Christine, you want to be ready for that, we can start talking about more things now. And well, we want to thank the IBS. We want to thank all the speakers, and we want to thank all the people that were there talking and sending wonderful questions. And we want to finish this also announcing a new event that we have in November. Marc Sobran and myself, that we are also part of Madres Universidad. We are the Commission of Equality of the Spanish Ecological Society. And it's been 1 year that we are organizing WISE, that is a conference to talk about women in science, ecology, and it's going to happen in November. So I want to use this to also announce, yeah, 1 second, I need to share my screen. So,
Brilliant.
So please, yeah, we all book these days, and we can talk for 3 days. In the morning we have different people speaking, and in the afternoons we have like 7 or 8 different ecological societies. So our plan was to do round discussions to try to make a short list of things that we need to implement in the different countries. And the topic was more in Europe, was focused in Europe, because at the beginning this was a live event, but yeah, maybe we can start like that, a discussion, and then in the future we can make this bigger. So yeah, thank you. Yeah,
so Sarah, we can certainly put that on the IBS website as well to advertise it to our network. Very, very sadly, I see we really have run out of time. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you on behalf of the IBS for all of you for pulling this together. It's been a really fantastic effort, and I mean, what conversation. So let's make this the beginning of the conversation, and let's all try and bring about that change. I've certainly learned a lot myself, and I hope everyone who's joined in has also learned a lot, and we all take away just one thing about how we can start to readdress some of these gender bias issues that are so inherent in everything we do. So thank you very much on behalf of the International Biogeography Society, and we'll carry on talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.